No.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Digital Marketing Conference. After listening to the keynote, it was pretty interesting. Some things that they was discussed made me think, the metaverse and the opportunities. But I'm excited to jump on this track, powerful brands. We have an amazing speaker. He's going to speak and share with us how we can hack, how we can grow using guerrilla marketing. So basically, the seven sins of growth marketing. He's a very interesting gentleman. We had a chat previously. His name is Ferdinand Goetzen. I hope I pronounced it right. And he's the CEO of Reveal, and he was awarded as the best marketing under 30 in Netherlands, which is amazing. And from what I saw, he grew a large number of companies in Netherlands. So I'm excited to listen to his ideas, tips, and yeah. That's basically my introduction. Ferdinand, you can take over.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. I'm gonna just pull this up. Can you see my screen? Is
Yep.
this working? Yeah, perfect. Cool. Yeah. So as Alexander said, I have a background in marketing and growth. I think kind of live in a world where the barriers between departments, especially in tech companies, are quickly disappearing, and working on a kind of collaborative, holistic level is becoming more and more important. So whether you want to call it marketing, growth, it's just a matter of terminology. Um, but yeah, as Alexander said, I have a background working for several different companies in this space. Most notably, I was the chief marketing officer at a company called Recruity and the director of marketing growth at a company called 3D Hubs, now called Hubs. Both companies exited in 2021 last year. And in these companies, I had the chance, as well as in various other companies. I used to work in agencies and in consultancy. I got the chance to see how lots of different companies work, from small 3-4 person startups all the way to big corporate banks like ING and the like. And I really got to see what are the kind of pitfalls that companies fall into, or what are the mistakes that you see companies making, and what are the kind of risks that you see along the way. And then early last year, in the midst of the pandemic, I decided, following the acquisition of the last company I worked for, I decided to quit my job and start my own company. And that's what I founded, a company called Reveal. And Reveal is essentially a customer insights platform. We're essentially a platform that brings UX and product teams together and help them create a real product experience, a really powerful product experience. And it's all about being customer led. So understanding your customer research, your customer feedback, really understanding the customer. It's something I've been preaching for the last 10 years. And I finally built a company around that idea. And it's also something I'll be touching upon in this talk as I go along. As always, please don't hesitate to ask questions. And yeah, I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. My name is a unique spelling. So if you add me there and drop me a message, I'm always happy to answer and connect. So, what are the seven sins of growth, or the seven sins of marketing? I think in some ways this is always evolving, but I generally see the same kind of trends when I'm looking at companies. And the number one I see is budget wasting. And this is becoming a little bit less problematic than it used to, but you still see it a lot. Um, I think a lot of people think that if you have a lot of budget to spend, you should spend it. And I think there are kind of two camps that have emerged here. You have the companies that spend a lot without really necessarily thinking about what they're spending. And then you have the companies that don't want to spend at all. And yeah, I think that's quite a strong dichotomy that doesn't really need to exist. It's not about whether you spend a lot of money or not a lot of money. It's about how much are you wasting, how much are you getting out of your budgets. And I used to work for a company called Growth Tribe. They're one of the biggest training companies in the growth marketing space, and I helped build their early courses. And one of the things we always talked about is that, if you look on the left here, this is a graphic kind of summarizes it. the traditional budget is usually you have a big budget, you have an idea like a campaign or a project or an initiative, and you throw the budget at it, and you do what I basically like to call pay and pray, which is you put the money in there and you hope it works. Whereas what you should really be doing is you should try to think about, how can I validate the assumptions and the ideas behind what I'm trying to do? So if I'm trying to launch a campaign, I have assumptions. Who's my audience? I believe that this audience with this content and this trigger is going to be interested in this product. There's a lot of assumptions in there which you need to validate. Am I choosing the right audience? Am I finding them in the right place? Am I targeting them at the right moment? Um, and in order to really validate these, you need to experiment, which means you start with a small budget, you try a few different things, you try to optimize the ad copy if you're talking about ads, or the landing page copy if you're talking about landing pages, or even a product experience if you're talking about a user experience within a certain feature. Test things first with a small budget, with a small amount of audience, see what works, and then you scale it. And this might very well mean actually that in the long run, you're spending more money because you start with this little budget and then you go to the bigger budget and then you go to the really big budget. And that might mean spending 10%, 15% more than if you do this. But here you probably have a 90% chance of success, and here you have a 10% chance of success. I'm kind of pulling those numbers out of the air, of course. It's relative, but the idea is that you should always be testing what you're doing. So I like to always follow an experimental framework. You start with setting goals, you come up with ideas, you prioritize them based on your experience, based on your input, based on your customer understanding. You then test, analyze, and then you iterate and scale. And this is really the foundation of successful growth teams. So whether they're product oriented or marketing oriented, it doesn't really matter. It's all about testing and iterating as you go. And then I believe that customer centricity, understanding your customer, should be the underlying driver in all of this. And like I said, it's not about not spending money. I think this is really important, because when you look at the world of growth hacking, sometimes you kind of get the impression that some people say, hey, you need to find all those free hacks and things that work for really cheap. That's not necessarily the case, because, uh, there's this quote here by Henry Ford, which is, the man who stops advertising to save money is like the man who stops a clock to save time. It's not that you shouldn't spend money. It's just that you should spend it wisely. The second problem I see, on the second kind of sin, is data paralysis. I used to say, when I used to do this talk, it used to be all about being data driven, that companies weren't data driven enough. But I kind of found that even in the bigger, older corporates, this has changed a lot. Companies are better than ever at gathering data, at seeing the importance of data. But you often see that there's now too much data. There's so much data, and it's scattered and it's siloed, and you kind of end up being kind of paralyzed. You got this analysis paralysis and decision paralysis. It's difficult to make choices when you have so much data. And I very often see one of the things that companies nowadays do is they don't make decisions if they don't have the perfect data. And I think that's a big mistake. So one of the things you see often is marketing attribution. How do I know which channel is having what impact? And very often you'll see founders or heads of marketing or other heads of other departments say, well, if we can't measure it, there's this expression, if it gets measured, it gets managed. And that's very true. Measuring your results is super important. Don't get me wrong. But just because you can measure something doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? So there could be incredibly great platforms. If you don't have the attribution in place, that doesn't mean those things don't work. That might mean they're not worth investing in because you can't judge how well they're performing. That's a different question. But usually you don't need 100% of the information in order to make the right decision. And one of the problems we fall into a lot with data is the idea of vanity metrics. These metrics that don't actually impact the goals. For example, we got this many Facebook followers. Well, if you're a corporate enterprise company selling deals worth $1 million, then the amount of Facebook followers you have is completely irrelevant, or LinkedIn followers, or whatever. Or when you're tracking, we had 50 demo requests last week, but if none of those convert, then those 50 demo requests don't matter. So it's really about understanding, okay, what metrics actually are indicators of success, because those are not vanity metrics. Vanity metrics are always dangerous. Tim Ferriss describes these as the metrics that are good for feeling awesome, but bad for action. I think it's really important to know what metrics actually represent success and how can I track those accurately. So that's the first. The other thing to think about is to focus. So there's this idea of the North Star metric. What is that one metric that the whole company can rally around? I think that's an interesting idea. It's very difficult to do well, though. And I see a lot of companies rallying around metrics that don't necessarily make too much sense. So if you don't have that one single metric that's important, it's important to at least rally around a few metrics that represent success for your business. And metrics can be difficult because metrics and goals are not the same thing. For example, I like to look at kind of growth as three different elements. You've got your performance side of marketing and growth. That's your ads and that's your campaigns. That's your conversion rate optimization. You've got your brand focus side of growth. That's your creative side, your identity. And then you've got the product side of growth, which is, am I building a product that actually leads to the growth of my business? And you can have goals within each, right? So when you're looking at performance marketing, you want to generate a lot of leads. You want your leads to have a high level of convertibility, and you need those converting leads to have a high value. Why? Because if I'm driving a lot of leads that don't convert, that's not worth a lot. If I'm driving a lot of leads that convert, but they don't convert and they all pay $1 per lead, it's an example, of course, then they're not worth a lot either. So you need those three kind of ideas, those goals together in order to have a good performance marketing setup. Same with brand. When you have a brand, you want to reach a lot of people. When you reach them, you want them to recognize you. And when they recognize you, you want them to think of you favorably. It's not just about reaching people, because a lot of brands reach a lot of people and everyone says, oh, I freaking hate that brand. So it's important to have those different factors and think about, hey, what makes a great brand? What makes a great marketing performance marketing setup? What makes a great product? And then it's one thing to talk about the goals. So for product marketing here, I said you want to activate users, you want them to expand and retain and refer others. But metrics is another story. And metrics, depending on your business, can look very different and it's very complex. And it's really important to understand what metrics matter, because ideally you want metrics that are the highest indicators of success, however you as a team define success. The problem is, if you're waiting for the most solid success metric, you usually have to wait a long time. For example, if you have slow sales cycles and you're looking at revenue, it might take some time for you to actually see revenue from a certain campaign coming in. So how do you actually see whether that campaign is performing? And this is where what I would recommend is to work with what I call input and output metrics. Your output metric is the metrics that represent the ultimate goal you're trying to achieve. So in a sales team, that'll be closed sales, for example. In a marketing team, in a performance marketing team, that could be MQLs generated. In a brand team, that could be, I don't know, certain brand penetration metrics, for example. So you have your ultimate metric, the one you're trying to achieve. So for example, here I took as an example, so Reveal, the company that I run, is a software as a service, a SaaS company, monthly subscription. So we have a metric called monthly recurring revenue increase. So how much is our MRR increasing by from new business? So how much revenue are we bringing in from new businesses joining? And that's our ultimate metric that we look at this stage of our growth. But there's a lot of metrics that contribute to that. So for example, revenue is a result of how many users are paying and how much are they paying? What is the average revenue per user? So if you have a lot of users who are paying very little, that'll affect your revenue. And if you have very few users who are paying a lot, that'll also affect your revenue. And then if you want to see what contributes to having a lot of paid users, well, it's the number of sales qualified leads and the conversion rate from those sales qualified leads to paid. And if you want to look at your average revenue per account, it's how many of your sales qualified leads are converting to paid and what is the average value of each sales qualified lead. This is a little bit complex. I'm not going to go deeper into this, but the idea here is simple, is that you have an output metric, what you're trying to achieve, and then you have metrics that contribute directly to that metric. And this is why if your ultimate goal is revenue, looking at your number of LinkedIn followers probably doesn't make sense in a performance marketing context. In a branding context, maybe that's very true. Maybe you're trying to measure ultimately how many people are we reaching with our brand and our content. Then you might be looking at LinkedIn followers. So it's really important to think about, I think there's this misconception that certain metrics are exclusively vanity metrics. That's not necessarily true. It's just about what are you trying to achieve and what actually contributes to achieving that. And I always recommend that you build your metrics and build your OKRs around this. So at the last company I worked at, we built these complex sheets where you had an output metric you were trying to achieve. Each person had an output KPI, and then they had input KPIs. Because at the end of the month, if you haven't reached your goals, you really need to understand where did it fail. The other thing I like to say is that I'm really a big fan of the 40 to 70% rule. This is actually an idea forwarded by Colin Powell, was part of the U.S. government years ago, and he had this idea where he said essentially you need 40 to 70% of the information you wish you had in order to make a decision. And I think that's really, really important. Jeff Bezos is also a big believer in this, that you don't need 100% of the data. You don't need 100% of the information to know whether you're making a good decision or not. An example I always like to share is very often when people are sitting around deciding what they should eat, you'll have a lot of debate, and then if somebody comes and says let's eat at McDonald's, suddenly everybody says, oh no, actually I want to eat there. It's no decision is always worse than a mediocre decision, and you don't need 100% of the information to make a good decision. So it's important to understand where that line is. So you want to gather data, you want to validate the ideas you have, but you don't necessarily need to be paralyzed by the perfect amount of information. Next is the third kind of sin that I see is ignoring the funnel, ignoring the customer journey. If you're focusing too much on one part of this marketing growth funnel, then you're probably not going to see growth in the bigger picture, or you risk not seeing growth in the bigger picture, because the very first thing you do is your brand engages with a person for the first time until the moment they decide to leave your company forever after using your product or service for 10 years. There's a whole journey in between, and each step of that journey has journeys embedded in it. And it's important to understand what is that journey the customer goes to, from getting to know your brand, to starting to test your product, to comparing it to others in the market, to deciding to pay, to deciding to use it and invite other users. This is more of a software example, but it applies to any industry, basically. So you need to understand, what is this funnel like for your business, and how can you optimize throughout? And this is where those three kind of pillars of growth that I mentioned come back, because your brand marketing should be focused on getting people to know your brand. Hey, do they know us? Do they know what we're doing? Your performance marketing is about turning that kind of broad awareness into concrete interest. Do they have intent? Might they actually buy our product or service? And then the product side is really about making sure, are we building the best thing out there in the market? Because that's ultimately how you're going to be successful. And it is a complex thing, and this is where I'm not a big fan. You might have heard of the T-shaped player, this idea that you can have this huge, broad, and deep set of skills. I think that gets misinterpreted quite a lot. You're not going to have someone who's good at everything, so it's important that if you're a generalist, then you can work as a project manager, a product owner, as a manager, as a director between these different areas. But if you want to really go deep, you need to specialize in certain skills. So on the brand side, you're going to need a certain set of skills in order to really develop there. If you're then going from the brand side into the performance marketing side, you need a different set of skills. And if you go from the performance marketing side into the product marketing side, it's yet a different set of skills. So you don't need to be a great product designer, UX researcher, SEO specialist, ad specialist, copy specialist. Chances are you're not going to be amazing at all of those things. So if you want to go into one of these areas, it's good to think about, hey, what is the one or two things I want to be really good at? Unless you want to go more the generalist path, that's also fine. But it's important that if you're building a team, if you're working as an organization, that you bring people with these different skills together to really look at the whole customer journey. The fourth sin I see quite often is excessive outsourcing. I've done this a lot in the past. I think outsourcing can be great, hiring consultants and freelancers, especially agencies. It can be really good, especially early on in an organization, or if you want a big set of expertise. But usually this ends up backfiring for a few reasons. And there are great agencies out there, but most agencies will not facilitate certain things. For example, you want to own the strategy that you're developing, and you want to make sure that everything you're doing is in line with your strategy. You want to own the data. You don't want the data to be somewhere else. You want to own the brand. You want to develop the brand and the identity of what you're doing, and you want to own the process. And usually when you hire agencies or externals, you need to pay attention to the fact that you keep these four elements in-house. Because if you outsource the process, or if you outsource the strategy, or you outsource the brand, nobody knows your product as well as you do. Nobody knows your market as well as you do. Nobody understands the challenges, the brand identity you want to convey, the particular product you're trying to develop, the vision you have as a company. Nobody can echo that the way you as a company can. So it's important that if you do work with external parties, that they actually align with these four things, that they work in line with your strategy, that they help share the data with you, that they understand your brand and know how to convey it, and that they understand your process. And this is as true of a Google Ads agency as it is of a social media marketing agency, as it is of a design agency, a brand agency, or even a software development agency. Embed them in your processes, embed them in the way of your way of working as a company, make them part of your way of working, because that way, number one, you don't grow dependent on external parties, which is always a risk. And number two, you keep all of the knowledge and skills in-house, so that when you do hire in-house people, they can easily get onboarded and take those things forward. Another reason to do this is that the tooling landscape is kind of going crazy, maybe a bit too crazy. But if you're looking at, this is kind of the MarTech landscape over the last years. You had about 150 tools back in 2010, and that grew up to over 7,000 in 2018. And these days we're looking at thousands and thousands of tools. And of course, tools don't always replace skills. That's definitely not the case, but they help you test ideas and they help you try out things and they help you build more internal processes if you use them correctly. That's also what we try to do with Reveal, for example. We say, cool, you should work with UX agencies if you want to work with UX agencies. You should work with product agencies if you want to work with product agencies. But it's important that you own the process. And by using Reveal, you can own that process and you can have those agencies work inside a tool that you own with a process that you own and with all the data that you should own. And that's kind of the idea behind a lot of these tools. And then, of course, it's important to make sure that you're collaborating with people of these different skills. I touched upon the skills a moment ago, but here's a good example. Like I said, I don't believe you can be good at everything. It's there's always the risk of having the jack of all trades, master of none. It's good to be a generalist. I'm a generalist, by the way. I'm not super expert at any of these things, and I was always quite good at a lot of them. And that's basically why I became a manager and an entrepreneur, because that's where I could use that the strongest. But if you want to specialize, it's important you understand those specialist skills. But of course, around those specialist skills, there are a lot of other things that can help make you successful. So you've got your foundational skills, which is kind of the fundamental things about being successful in a business that you should understand. Things like OKRs, things like collaboration, some basic copywriting skills and storytelling skills are always useful. Then you have your company related skills. Do you understand the brand and the positioning, those kind of things? And then you have your specialization, which I think you should only pick one or two of if you want to be a specialist. And then you have your strategic skills. Can you work well with stakeholders? Can you get people on board? This also contains a lot of that kind of pesky office politics and company politics that we all say we don't believe in and don't like, but unfortunately tend to exist in most companies. So it's building a successful organization has a lot of different facets, and it's important to understand the full range of the customer journey and to understand which skills you can hone so that you can bring people with those other skills together, either by hiring them, either by working with freelancers, or by bringing people together from within the organization. I see someone here saying that they struggle to see the slide quality. This should be a PDF, so it should be crisp. If you're not seeing it, drop me a message on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to send you I'm happy to send you this. You can also check out my LinkedIn. I wrote an article about what skills you should develop to be successful in growth, and it has this graphic in there in high res. Next bit here, and this is the biggest one, and this is what I basically built my whole career on, is this idea that the biggest mistake companies make is that they don't know the customer. And this is fundamentally true of companies, whether they're customer centric or not. I see it over and over again. And if you're a marketer, and even if you're not a marketer, but if you're a marketer, your job is to understand how the customer wants to buy and to help them to do so. And it's really important that you understand who they are. Now, this is kind of where the online event format is a bit harder, because usually if we were all in a room together, I'd say hands up if you have personas within your company. Well, personas are nice, but they can also be a little bit difficult. I give this example here. It's my favorite example. I didn't come up with it, but I've seen it, and it's always great. If you have a persona, you might be looking at a handful of factors, demographic descriptors, let's say. So let's say you have a persona who's a 72-year-old male. He's British, white male, self-employed, married, remarried, has children, owns a mansion, lives primarily in London, and his main interests are sports cars, travel, and dogs. This one over here, this description perfectly describes Prince Charles. So you would say, cool. Here we have a persona, and that persona is Prince Charles, and that persona is useful because it lets me create generalized opinions or form generalized opinions about my audience. The problem, though, is that this description not only fits Prince Charles, it also fits Ozzy Osbourne. So even though demographically these two guys are really, really similar, I think if those of you who are familiar with both Prince Charles and Ozzy Osbourne, a member of the royal family and one of the founding fathers of heavy metal, you probably realize that they're probably not that similar. And this is where demographics can be confusing or misleading, because at the end of the day, you'd probably argue that Ozzy Osbourne and Prince Charles are very different people and will probably react very differently to very different kinds of products, ideas, and marketing. Of course, there are things in common. They probably both are interested in prostate medication because they're in their 70s. But other than that, there's going to be a lot of differences between these two personas. And that's why a simple descriptive persona based on demographics alone is not enough. What you need to know is what drives these people. How do they make decisions? And one of the things I like is within the jobs to be done framework. I don't have time to go into this. So if you're interested, check out the jobs to be done. There's a lot of information on Google about it. And jobs to be done is essentially the idea that you're looking at what they're trying to achieve rather than who they are. because the fundamental idea is that people who have the same goals will act more similarly than people who have the same profiles. But within this idea, I like to look at what we call the four forces. What are the four forces that drive a decision in any company? And this can be used in marketing, sales, product, customer success. It's important to understand this for your customers. And there's always going to be things that push you towards a new solution, a new product, a new service. And there's going to be things that pull you towards your existing habits and solutions. So, what is currently pushing you towards a new product? And it can be a few different things. So usually you're pushed by a need, a pain. I'm struggling with X, so I need a product to solve this. But sometimes also you're being pulled towards a product by the magnetism of that product. For example, that new iPhone looks super slick and sexy. I want it. I don't have a current problem with my current phone, but that new phone looks really awesome. By the way, I'm not plugging iPhone here. I have a Google Pixel myself. But you might have, there's the magnetism of the new solution, and then you have the push of the current situation you're in. And then that works the other way around. You probably have habits as a user right now that stop you from using a new solution. Like, all my data is in this platform. Do I want to move to a new platform? And there's also the anxiety of the new solution. I know my current situation. How do I know if the new situation will be as good? And it's important to understand what these driving factors are when someone's making a decision. And kind of doubling down on that, it's important to just understand in general how people make decisions. Now, again, this is a little bit hard to do remotely, but I'm going to give all of you while I'm talking, if you have another tab open, imagine if I told you landed in Amsterdam and you're about to meet, I don't know, about to meet a friend, and and they want to go eat pizza. And it's really important for you to impress this person. Let's say it's a date, even easier. You're about to go on a date and you need to impress them. They said they love pizza. The stakes are higher now, guys. They love pizza. You want to take them for pizza in Amsterdam. What is the very best pizza in Amsterdam? Now, I think I made a poll here. I'm going to put this poll live. Feel free at any point in time to just do this search and answer the poll. And just basically do some proper research, not more than 2 minutes, but do a 2 minute research into what the best pizza in Amsterdam is. And then start doing some voting here in the poll. And then at the end, we can see which one succeeded. The reason I say this is you're probably going to come up with similar examples, and probably some of the options in the polls I shared are the ones you're going to come up with. And the reason that happens is that people have the same way of searching for solutions. We get triggered by a need. For example, hey, I'm hungry and I want pizza. You start exploring options, and this is a good one for all of you doing SEO. It's not just about ranking on Google. For example, in the pizza world, you need to rank on Google, you need to rank on iAmsterdam, you need to rank on TripAdvisor, because people are going to not just look at Google, they're going to look at the first 2, 3, 4 comparison sites at the top of Google, and they're going to also find solutions there. And then once you've explored a solution, people start shortlisting. So, hey, I've seen 20 pizza places. These are the 3 or 4 I'm going to look into. And that's when they compare what is pizza A versus pizza B, and then they make a decision. And the higher stake the purchase, the more expensive or more important the purchase, the more this process becomes real. So when we're buying software, we're triggered by a need, we explore the possible solutions in the market, we shortlist the 2 or 3 that on the surface from a quick research seem to be the best, and then we compare them, and then we decide. And this is really important to bring this into the marketing and the commercial efforts that you do, because it's important to be able to balance this. It's important to understand if you don't make that shortlist, for example, everything else you do doesn't really matter. So how can you make that shortlist? I think I was talking just now about the push and pull. By making sure that these factors are on your landing page, for example, or in your marketing, that they're addressed, you can make sure you make the shortlist. And then once the comparing comes, then you've got to think about other creative ways: reviews, social proof, good demos in your sales. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And ultimately, it's important to ask yourself, what is a best customer? What does that even mean? Is it the ones that are really easy to acquire? Is it the ones that spend the most money or stay the longest with your product? Are they the one that are the easiest to close when you have them on a sales call? Are they the one who are most active in the product? Are they the ones who are the lowest touch, so they don't ask too many support requests, for example? Are they the ones who are most loyal or advocating? Sometimes you're going to find out that the least paying customers are the ones that ask the most stuff and BS on the customer support, but that's not always going to be the case. So ultimately, I usually find that there are some companies that just really get what you're doing. They just really align with what you're doing as a company, and those are the people who are the best. And they're going to have some kind of combination of these factors here. And the better you understand your best customers, the better you can serve them. And it's really important to not just know them, it's really important to empathize with them, to connect with them. So I always say that customer knowledge is not the same as customer empathy. It's one thing to say, I know my customer is 24, male, likes Snickers, and plays basketball on the weekends. But we saw with the Prince Charles and the Ozzy Osbourne example that that's not always enough. You need to really understand what drives them, and not just what drives them in a professional sense, even in a B2B company, but what drives them in an emotional sense, right? What are they trying to achieve as a person? Where do they see themselves? Where do they see how do they view their job, for example? People who are super passionate about their work will treat B2B products differently as people who aren't that passionate about the work they're doing. It's important to understand the functional, the practical, the emotional goals they have. And the only way to do that is to talk to them. And the thing is, companies are talking to customers every single day. We see this all the time. In fact, I think it's 95% of companies regularly talk to the customer, whether that's in sales, support, UX research, it doesn't really matter. Most companies are talking to the customer, but only 60%, 40 to 60% manage to make something out of those insights. And I think that's essentially the foundation behind which we started Reveal, because we see this all the time, that companies talk to the customer, but then that information gets scattered, it gets lost. They're constantly redoing things, they're constantly doing repeat research, and they're just not really having impact with the research they're doing. And it's important to know that when you're talking to the customer, if you use Intercom or you use Typeform or SurveyMonkey or you interview your customers or you do sales calls or you have HubSpot, you're sitting on a gold mine. You're sitting on a gold mine of information because 90% of the questions you ask in your business are in your customers' minds. You just need to talk to them. You need to understand them. You need to empathize with them. And if you are interested, you can always check out reveal.co, because that's essentially what we do. We help you bring all of your customer data into one place, map the customer journey, and take action on it. And that's kind of the foundation of what we're doing. That also leads directly into the sixth sin, which is a lot of companies just don't create enough value. The product's not as good as the competition. The content isn't as good as they think. They're just not creating enough value in the market to really, really be successful. And I think this is one of the things that in a kind of short attention span a digital world, people also lost kind of the idea of what value really is. So we live in a world where people think that if you write a grammatically correct blog article, that's already good value. But that's not necessarily the case. Or if you're writing the same content as everybody else, you know, that's not valuable. What's valuable is doing something different. It's telling a story, is connecting with the people and addressing their needs directly. And I got this quote here. It's a bit ironic because I kind of think that Facebook is a crappy product. No offense to anyone who works there, but it's from the Meta verse products. It's by far the least successful at the moment. But Alex Schultz, who was the VP of growth of Facebook, once said, "If you don't have a great product, there's no point in executing well and growing it because it won't grow." And I really think that's true. I really think having the best product helps. And it's something that I've really been religiously passionate about almost at all the companies I've worked at, is build the best product, build the best service. And you might be an early stage company. This is what I have now with Reveal. We started last year. Do we have the number one single product in the market? Not necessarily. But when we're talking to customers and potential customers, we're always saying, look, we're building something amazing. And every month you're going to see something new in the platform, and we're going to build the best product because that's what we fundamentally believe in. And that's something you need to do with your business as well. I understand for some of you that's going to be a little bit more difficult because you might not have that impact on stakeholders. You might not be able to convince the CEO or your manager that we need to improve certain things in the product and service offering. If you are in that situation, there's two things I recommend. Number one, working with customer data, understanding the customer, bringing those opinions to the forefront. That's a big, big step. It's very hard for founders to ignore 10 quotes from customers saying, I don't like this, or I don't like that, or I'm struggling with this. Number one. And number two, if you're in marketing, you can still create value, even if don't have direct impact on the product. In the content you create, in the webinars you organize, in the initiatives you launch, building a strong brand and creating value for a community doesn't just rest on your product. Now, these things cannot compensate for a bad product, but they can help a lot. And if you look out there, if you look in any industry out there, there's always one product that's better than the next product, right? There's always going to be a better product in any given industry. And you'll see a lot of companies, they gain their benefits by niching down and by creating a lot of value around their product as well. So it's really important to take this into account. If you're doing marketing, it can be a huge, huge, huge win to create value. Just create guides and do events and create webinars. These kind of things can be valuable and make it unique and make it different. That's something that we're always trying to do ourselves. We try to build the product that our users want. And that's also basically a headline on our website as well. Build the product your users want, because that's how you're going to be successful. The last one here, and this is for all of those out there who are really into growth hacking. I started my career in growth hacking. And I've even chatted a few times with Sean Ellis about this, that the word growth hacking has been, people took it and ran with it. And there's a lot of great things about it. And to some extent, it's still relevant today. To some extent, it's a bit dated. But I think some people get too much into the hacking side of growth hacking, because it's great to find shortcuts. It's great to find more efficient ways to do things. It's great to find that silver bullet or that golden nugget. Like, don't get me wrong, those things are super, super, super valuable. But I tend to see quite a lot of growth hackers having a very short-term mindset. They tend to focus so much on the growth hacks that they don't really understand on the macro level what is your business doing? What are you trying to achieve within this market? And I think if you take the market out of marketing, you're making a mistake. And this is probably the biggest advice at the end of this, is if you know your customers and you have a good product, it's great to find those shortcuts. It's great to be quick, move fast, break things. That's a great mentality. But it's also important to understand what your short-term efforts will do in the long term. Um, because there's a big difference between traction and growth. It's one thing to get a few people interested and to generate a bunch of leads. It's another thing to build a business in the long run. And it really depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? So if you're a freelancer hired for 3 weeks or for 3 months to achieve a certain short-term goal, go for it, go all out. But if you're trying to build a business in the long run and you're trying to grow it in the long run, you really need to think about what the overall strategy is. I don't usually like to bring out old-timey quotes because it can seem a bit pretentious, but I do love this one, which is that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, and tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. So strategy, tactics, and execution, those are the three things you need, and you can't really do one without the other. And to kind of clarify what the difference is, strategy is about doing the right things. There's a lot of things you could be doing. Strategy is choosing the right ones. Tactics is about doing things right. So if you have a good strategy and you're doing the right things, those right things you're doing, you got to do them right, because you could have a great strategy, but you're taking a completely wrong approach towards it. And then you have execution, and that's basically getting things done. And you need that ladder, because what I see a lot with the growth hacking community is that you do have some people who are focused all on execution, maybe a little bit on tactics, but they're just kind of doing a lot of stuff, but it's kind of it's kind of floating around in this space where it's not tied together by anything. So it's really important to understand what are the things we should be doing, how do we want to be doing them, and how are we going to make sure they get done. And that's really, really important, because at the end of the day, and this not yeah, marketing isn't that hard. Like most things in marketing aren't that hard. Of course, the individual skills and the strategy things are really hard. But if you think about lead generation, I love this article by Andrew Chen. It's quite an old one now, actually. It's basically, there's just like 4 or 5 ways to acquire customers. It's not an infinite amount. So you could do paid ads, or you can build some kind of virality through your brand, through social, through referral marketing. There's SEO, because it's high intense search online. And then there's sales, like outbound sales. And then some of you will have that one niche channel that seems to work particularly well. But at the end of the day, like the it's not easy, but it's simple. Maybe that's better. I wouldn't say marketing. It's not that marketing isn't hard, but it doesn't have to be super complicated, because there's only a handful of ways to really drive customers to your product, and there's only a handful of ways to really make those customers successful. And I think that's why you need a good strategy, and that's why you need good tactics, because if you have a unique way of approaching this market, and you then know how you're going to get that done and how you're going to bring in the skills or the resources to do that effectively, you're going to be successful more likely than not. And this is what I always say: like, it's simple, but it's not easy. So please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that growing a business is easy. It's one of the hardest things you can do. But I think people sometimes tend to overcomplicate things where you don't need to. And it's really just about understanding, hey, let's do something different. Let's create value. Let's understand our customer, and let's just kick some ass. And that's really boils down to the question of, like, what are you trying to build? And this kind of idea here is to tie it all together is, if you know what you're trying to do, if you have a good vision as a company, or you work for a company with a good vision, and you're building a good product and you're creating value and you understand your customers, so you really know what value means to them, and then you're starting to bring together the skills and the processes that help you execute on that, um, you're pretty well set up. And yeah, I've kind of getting close to the end of my time here. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to fire away. Um, you got a quick summary of what I generally see as the big pitfalls. And maybe a good caveat here is the reason I know these is because I've made every single mistake in this slide deck, like every single one I've made at some point or another. And I'm sure there's many more I'm still making and I'm gonna make. Cool. I don't know where I can see the questions. Maybe I should be clicking on Q&A.
That was a great presentation, Ferdinand. Thank you so much. If anyone has a question, you can ask at Q&A on the chat on the right-hand side or on the chat. I found it really. I have a question. How do well you spoke briefly about Prince Charles and demographics, but how do you make sure that when you do your demographics, you're like, this is who I'm after, rather than George, let's say from Central London?
Yeah, you just talk to people. I think that's the most important thing. I think the problem is we have a tendency to kind of try and on paper make our personas and then we talk to them. Whereas I think you need to kind of first talk to people. Then you need to understand what is the average customer journey that a customer goes on. And then you can start building your personas, looking at your segmentation, looking at the differences between them. I think we used to have this big quote at 3D Hubs. We always printed it on the wall, which is "Get out of the fucking building," which is like leave your office and go out and talk to people. And we have an office here in a co-working space. There's about 10 companies in this co-working space that don't use our product, but could use our product. So we could just walk in there and ask them, say, hey, guys, do you have time for 10-minute coffee? I want to ask you a bunch of questions. It's not that hard to get started. Then doing it on a really sophisticated level and a really advanced level, of course, that's something you need to build up over time.
So just basically talk, like call people, go face to face, and just talk with your potential clients.
Yeah, talk to them first, and then you're going to start seeing trends. You're going to start seeing patterns. And once you start seeing patterns, that's when you can start kind of theorizing around it and start diving a little bit deeper and thinking about your personas. Because demographics can definitely be a really relevant thing, right? So if you're creating certain products for certain demographics will be important, but they can also be misleading. I think that's kind of the idea.
Okay. Question. We'll have a couple of questions. What are the most time efficient ways to talk to your customers for a small company with lower budgets? Asked by Refine.
Yeah, pick up the phone, call them, and talk. That's the easiest. If your company a low budget, I guess if you want to get a lot out of it, if there's a trade show or an event, it's a little bit harder with COVID, but I don't know how it is where you are, but in Amsterdam, it's all open again. If you go to an event where your target audience hangs out, that's a great opportunity to talk to people. Organizing a meetup is pretty easy, straightforward. You put $100 on social ads, you organize a meetup for people in your industry, offer them some free value, talk to them. So that's an easy way. If you do have customers, just pick up the phone and talk to them. You'll be surprised. Most customers do want to talk. Most customers do want to talk about what because if you frame it as we're making the experience better for you, they're gonna be open to talking.
Okay. Next question. How you should engage with your customers to, for example, get more ratings, feedback, and etc. Asked by Domande. How I pronounce your names, right?
Yeah, that's a hard one sometimes. I think first of all, reach out to them personally and create value for them. So one of the things we do, for example, is if a customer comes to us and says, "Hey, we're kind of struggling with this thing," so we have a really active customer success. So here's a good example: our customer success people have a background in UX and product because we want to help our customers. So our customer success people actually have a background in what our customers are doing. So we help them very hands-on. And then usually that's a great time to ask. So if they need something, get on a call with them and help them. And then you can say, hey, by the way, we're doing case studies, we're doing this, we're doing that. Could you help out? Would you be interested? I think that's a good way to do it. Incentives can be a nice thing. It depends a little bit on who you're talking to, whether those actually work. Ultimately, it's creating good value, right? If you create a good product, people are going to want to give you good feedback. So that also helps. But my suggestion is think of a moment when you give them the most value and ask them then. Don't ask them on their first day of their trial, for example. That's not a good time to ask.
Another question is how could, by the way, the time is running out, so there are more questions. I highly recommend you connect on LinkedIn and obviously continue
We
the
can rapid
conversation.
fire them.
But we have, how could you increase time to value for first paying users? Asked by Miklos.
Yes, Miklos. How could we? Yeah, uh, this really depends on your product and the flow. Understand the customer journey and try to bring this information in sooner. Flipping the aha moment is a good one. So one example I give usually is if you can get people to try the product before they even sign up, that's a big way to get them to that aha moment, the wow moment, and that'll give them value very quickly. Um, yeah, this is a more complex question. So if you drop me a message on LinkedIn, I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay. Next question is what was the biggest waste of budget in B2B that you've made? Asked by Avgustina.
Oh, yeah, there's quite a lot. Usually hiring people for roles that were not very well defined. That's usually the biggest budget waste. But we've definitely had a few campaigns where we said, okay, we let's. I think one of the ones is, for example, one company went out of business, one competitor, and we said let's try and poach their customers because those they were all out of business. So we said let's build an integration to import their data, and that didn't work.
Okay. Another question for companies which are not in the same geographic location as their customers, how would you recommend they get to know the customers?
Zoom.
Okay, Zoom. Good answer. Next question.
We're a remote company, by the way, so we do that as well. Just Zoom.
Zoom, Skype. Um, next question is how is it possible to create value for one-time customers? For example, driving school. There, there are first and last time. I mean, they're first and last time customers. It is possible to make long-term relationships with them, asked by
Yeah.
Sima.
Yeah, so definitely when you have a one-time product like driving school, sometimes real estate as well, the goal is not retention, but the goal is referrals. How do you create an awesome experience for them so that they refer other people? That can just be having awesome driving instructors. That can be being really helpful in the process, creating great content to help them pass their tests, having an online platform that they can sign up to. I don't know. I can think of a few examples off the top of my head, but the reason you want to do this is is essentially to get those referrals.
Okay. I wrote down awesome experiences. Great. It's a great insight, I think, for a lot of companies. Next question by Mohammed. What are the pitfalls in product-led growth?
The biggest pitfalls in product-led growth is that product-led growth needs to be preceded by customer-led growth. So we're big believers in customer-led product experiences. That's what we call them, because there's a product, there's an experience, but it has to be customer-led. So you have companies that are more product-led than customer-led. A good example is Apple. Apple doesn't really matter because they're on the forefront of innovation, but they will build what they will build regardless of what you say. That's why you have 50 dongles to connect your MacBook. I have a MacBook as well, so it's not a criticism, but being customer-led should come first, and being customer led is the ultimate way to be product led. So talk to your customers first and try to find a balance between your vision, which is the things your customers will never ask for, and actually validating that vision, which is the things that customers actually are interested in. So people always ask me that, hey, what about Henry Ford saying if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses? Yeah, the problem is, of course, you need a vision. You need to be doing something different, but how you do it, because the strategy that comes from you, but the tactics that needs to come from your customers.
Awesome. Ferdinand, thank you so much. I highly recommend you connect with Ferdinand on LinkedIn or Twitter. I think the first session is done. Thank you so much. So for how we are moving forward, the next we have a short break until 12:05. And then we have another speaker, which is his name is Simon Bayer. It's pre-recorded, so we will listen to Simon speak about performance branding on Facebook and Instagram. It's basically ideas and insights about how we can use branding on social media and how the digital consumer transformed throughout the pandemic. Now, another thing that we have is whoever is more engaged during the conference, they'll get different rewards. things from the organizers. The company, the main sponsor is Pact. They're giving 20 ebooks out. The ebook is called AI powered commerce. Basically, is if you're building a product or service with commerce AI. That's it for now. We will be back in 11 minutes. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much, Ferdinand. And I'll see you in 11 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.